To the end user, it's simple, right? Something they interact with. They'll have buttons, they'll have displays, and they'll just look at those. But this is what it looks like under the hood. It's time to sort of move away from this. We're essentially looking at a change in how modern development works, right? We have all along we've been writing code, rolling it out, and that's been enough. But engineering is changing very rapidly. There are alarmists on one end saying that engineers' jobs are going to be no more. How many of you have believed that at some point? Come on, I know you have more than how many hands are there, I know more than you have believed it. People have reconsidered careers, people have, do I put my child in engineering anymore? It's all happened, whether we admit it or not. That paradigm is changing very quickly. And where we are settling is not with AI replacing engineers, but more engineering roles evolving to take over product roles as well. And for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about what it takes to transition from an engineer to a product engineer. I haven't done that, but I have been an engineer and a product manager, so sort of know both those spheres. Let's look at how we've been traditionally building, right? We have all worked with PMs or founders if you're in a smaller company where you get one Jira ticket every morning, or 5 if you're unlucky. And by the end of the day, you have to roll that out. Could be a small bug fix, could be a massive feature. But as engineers, all of us lived and died and started our day with one Jira ticket. It has become, from being just a simple issue system, it has become how we measure our work. It has become how we are judged. This guy does not close enough tickets. This girl does closes too many tickets. It started becoming a commodity. It went beyond more than just a tracking system. But as engineers, we have been roped into thinking that these Jira tickets are just where our boundaries start and end. The difference in a pure engineer and the difference from a product engineer is when you look at a Jira ticket versus a retained user. If as an engineer you can do work that keeps users within your app or your website, whatever that work is, again, it could be a bug fix or could be a new feature that you roll out. The important thing here is the mindset. Let's stop thinking in terms of Jira tickets, start thinking in terms of how do I acquire more users, how do I keep users within the ecosystem. Could be something as simple as having a better loading screen. Right? Pure developer work to do. Maybe you add animations, you add better text, but at the end of it, if it makes people stay more or have more patience before they abandon your app, you are doing the work of a product engineer. You are thinking about user retention. Now, typical PMs are going to throw around buzzwords like these, like retention, moats, and acquisition, and it all sounds very intimidating in the beginning. That's one. Two, very likely the moment you first bring up any of these buzzwords in a conversation, the PM is going to shut you down saying, what do you know of product? And you're an engineer. What I'm going to do is first give you a few examples on how to make that mindset shift, and then give you a framework to sort of push back on how can you rationally challenge a product manager on the kind of PRDs you receive and the features you have to build. And this is gone. Okay. But first let's talk about a ship. So in the 15th, 16th, 17th century actually, the King of Sweden ordered a warship. It was called the Vasa. And about halfway through construction, he acted like a typical toxic product manager. He was rich and he wanted the world to know it. He was powerful and he wanted the world to know it. So he demanded heavy bronze cannons to be placed on both tiers of the ship, the first and second tier. He asked for sails to be smaller because they were taking away too much of the view of the ship. He asked for the wood to be stained black because it looked simply better when it went out in the sea. The engineers, the shipbuilders, they knew it was wrong. The moment he said bronze cannons, they knew he was not going to take the weight. You know what they did? They built it anyway, because if you refuse the king, you're probably going to be beheaded. The first voyage that the Vasa took lasted exactly 11 minutes. From harbor till the first time it hit deep water, and then it sank. It's still on display in Stockholm. It's considered one of the most well-preserved warships in the world. But what is the point if it didn't serve the purpose it was built for? Right? Sure, the bronze cannons look great. Everything that the king said, they followed it to the T, and that worked perfectly. But the moment it was actually put in a so-called production environment, it absolutely failed. So if you're building stuff that's to stay in a museum, or you're building a feature factory where you can take off I did 25 Jira tickets, great, that's going to work for you. You're going to probably get paid at the end of the day. Your PM is probably going to be happy because you're doing what they said, but you're not going to survive. That is the kind of job that will be taken over by AI. You have to evolve. When someone tells you to build something that's not working, you have to push back. But how do you push back? We'll come there. So, we are also conditioned to think that our code is our product. Right? It's not one person or one type of engineer. It's just how we are conditioned to think as engineers. The most dangerous thing a senior engineer or even a junior engineer can execute, by default the thought is it's going to be a bug or a vulnerability or something that can allow the system to get hacked. Those are things that are fixable. You roll out a fix on Monday morning, or the next day it's fixable. What you can't fix is spending weeks executing a flawed roadmap, because that time and effort that went into that does have a monetary cost for you and for the organization. And that is something that can't be fixed, because you will spend as much time rolling it back, so the effort has become double. The outcome is still zero, because if you know in third standard we study the difference between motion and locomotion. Right? If you move from one place to the other, you're actually doing some work. But if you go around in a circle and you come back to your starting place, you're doing absolutely zero work. Right? So if you ship what you're told, which is just code rather than features, you are doing zero work. You're charging your organization money, and you're wasting a ton of time that honestly nobody has, which AI can probably do in a day. Right? So don't sink the ship. How many of you have accounts with HDFC? Roughly what I expected. 30% of the Indian market is with HDFC, second largest retail bank. That's what their home screen looks like for the My Cards section. Now, if you open up their app, their default home screen is even worse. But I didn't want to make a very obvious example. This is what the My Cards section looks like, where you manage your credit and debit cards. This is the modern equivalent of that Vasa. The bloated enterprise PRD, where you have 8 PMs, all want to do different things, all want the same amount of visibility right on the homepage. You have your loan PM, whose KPI is the number of people who take loans. You have your cards PM, whose the KPI is how many people manage their cards. And of course, that's just the top 2. There are 25 more after that in an organization that size. And you know what? You think it stops there, but then it gets worse. Because now you have a carousel of offers from partner brands coming at the top. And you have a chatbot in the bottom right corner, because why do you not want to talk to your bank account? Somehow they took a feature-heavy page, added things that made it even worse, and then they wonder why it doesn't work. By contrast, on the right is Monza. Now, Monza is probably the world's largest neobank, operates in Europe and the US. They're offering exactly what HDFC is offering. They have loans in there, they have card summaries in there, they have card management in there. You know, the only thing they do different, they put users first. They get the same PRD that HDFC gets. Right? They say that you have to build these so and so features, they have to live on the homepage. But when they put the user first and they think about retention or acquisition, or how much time the user can spend on the app, or how much time does it take to do your main task that you came for, they end up with a UI that looks like this. Same controls, better positioned, better laid out, with the most prominent actions facing forward. Now at this point you're probably thinking to yourself, this is the designer's work, it's not my work as an engineer. Those roles are all merging. Right? The designer might design something on the left, and it has been designed by someone, but it will still make it to production. It is your job to sort of start growing out of your role into both that UX and the product roles, because the skill set is not what's differentiating you anymore. The skill set is all an LLM. How you think is your only differentiator. So don't become an HDFC. Don't take 4 seconds to cold start your app because you're loading stuff in the background. You will sink your ship, and you will end up nowhere. So how do you actually incorporate product thinking, and how do you push back when you're told to add, say, 10 features to the homepage, right? Stop arguing on points like code cleanliness or architecture or commits or lines of code. Nobody cares. Genuinely, nobody cares if your app is 10 MB or if it's 100 MB. Those days are gone. I remember back in 2016 or 17, there was this entire Google white paper on how Android apps should be below 5 MB so that you optimize for user space and for network conditions and so on. Genuinely now nobody cares. Phones are up to above 100 GB, even entry-level phones. Data is free. People don't care about how many lines of code you wrote or what SDK you stripped out. Sure, it's best practices, but should not be your default thought. Your default thought should be things that are user first. Now, that is what the step one to getting a framework to push back. Sit down with your product managers and establish something which, if you're working in enterprise, you know what an SLA is. Right? Establish something called an SLA. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I want you to look it up. Essentially, it's, without defining it, it's an agreement of what is acceptable. Right? So if you sit with your PM and keep features aside and say that for a user to stay engaged on our app or to not uninstall it out of frustration, let's try to keep our startup time to 1.5 seconds or 2.5 seconds. The number is not important here. The point is establishing what is acceptable. Once you have a framework like that in place, and startup time is one example, it lets you push back with data rather than things that are arbitrary like lines of code. Tomorrow, if your PM or your founder comes and tells you that you have to add this feature to the homepage or you have to fetch data in the background, you're not the one saying no anymore. Your data is the one saying no. You established with everyone's consent what a good cold start time looks like. This feature goes beyond those bounds. It is just not going to happen. So this is step one of your framework, which says that argue with your budgets, not your complaints. I have, disclaimer, I have been a founder also, without pointing fingers at anyone, because I have been there as well. I have seen engineers tend to be very attached to their code, to the borderline whiny about making changes to it. It's time to move on from that, right? Don't argue on how my architecture is going to get affected, or if you're a mobile developer, I can't write MVP architecture or MVVM architecture with this feature. It doesn't matter. Argue with what your budgets are, and the only budgets that are going to make sense to product managers or founders are ones that are either user facing or budget facing. Nothing else matters to them. Nothing else should matter to you as well. So establish that lifecycle agreement. Have those limits for everything in your product hard-coded. When anything pushes those limits beyond what's accessible, then you have a framework to push back. Okay, that's too technical anyway. How many of you know what the ingredients are, what these ingredients are for? Pancake, cake. Anyone else? Sorry, what did you say? Someone said something completely out of left field. But okay, I'm glad you know what this is. This is a recipe, classic recipe for cake. It's not pancakes, please. It's a cake in a dish, photograph from the top. In the 1950s, food engineers in the United States built what is called the Betty Crocker cake. Ready to eat, just add water kind of cake mixtures. Now you get them in the Indian markets as well. At the time, it was considered an engineering marvel, because engineers were taking what looked like a complex effort from bakeries and bringing it to everyday households just by adding water. Has anyone heard about this case study? You will be surprised to know it was a massive failure when it hit the markets. Logically, it makes sense, right? You get bakery level products in your house, right? They were not the kind of, there's 50 rupee cake mixtures which it's not going to taste anything the same. This was tasting exactly like a bakery or store-bought cake, but it completely crashed. Any guesses why? And before you make any assumptions, price point was great, taste was great, distribution was great, still failed. Vivek, you're getting a call. Who raises their hand to think I should answer it on the laptop? No? I'm tempted to do it anyway. So most housewives across the United States rejected it because it was too easy. There was no friction. They didn't feel like it was a cake that they had made. It felt like a cake where it came ready and they added water and they prepared it. Because of that lack of ownership in the end user, which in this case is the traditional baker or homemaker in the United States, because of the lack of friction, they didn't feel like it was a product that they owned or a cake that they baked in this case. They didn't buy it. They kept trying to struggle away with what you saw on the previous slide: eggs, flour, milk. How would you solve for this problem? I'm going to answer it, but I want you to think of it. I want you to think of it as well. As someone who has traditionally only been a food engineer, you perfected your instant cake mix, and you see that people don't like it because it's too easy. It was a very simple fix. It was more about positioning than anything else. The original recipe had into the mix, there were 3 eggs going. They removed one and then they told the homemakers, just add 1 egg. They based their entire marketing campaign on just add an egg. That was the tagline for the entire product for years. Complete shift. Because people were taking the conscious effort of buying an egg, cracking it, emptying it into the pan, then mixing the ingredients, it brought a sense of ownership into it. People now felt like it was their product. Right? It was their cake, they had made it. They could go and show off to people that yes, I made this cake. And this is not just an abstract lesson, this is something that can translate into your everyday software as well. Sometimes it's okay to just push the user to do something because they feel more committed to it. They feel more bought in for whatever you're selling. In larger firms, most developers wait for product managers to integrate Mixpanel or Analytics or ClickUp, whatever you want to use these days. You wait for them to write tickets to integrate those. Product thinking engineers are slightly different. You architect the logging in a way that proves or disproves the PM's hypothesis before they even ask. Right? So own that product loop. When you get a feature request, someone tells you what to build, start thinking ahead in terms of how would this impact the user? What can we measure? Will it improve our core business metrics or will it make them worse? Sometimes the things that seem the most obvious are not the answer, as in the case of easy to make cake. One fantastic example of that is Notion's onboarding. Classical product thinking would say that get the user to the product as soon as possible because then they can see the real value in it. And a lot of apps do this and sometimes it works for them. Notion's user base was power users who work heavily with data, with templates, with a ton of different ways to visualize the data and interconnected data points as well. Instead of saying just skip their entire onboarding process, they had a lot of engineered friction is what the term is called. They consciously ask you, what are you going to use this product for? Is it going to just be for planning? Is it going to be to manage your life? Is it going to be for working with other people? Then they ask you, what products do you want to connect with it? They ask you for Evernote, they ask you for data tools. By that point, it might seem like, and again, a classic PM is going to tell you that this is way too much friction. It's like 3 clicks or 3 steps by the time they get to the actual product. But there's a flip side as well, right? Because now people feel invested or bought into the product. They're less likely to drop off if they take in the effort of connecting all these apps or even one of these apps. Now, a word of caution here. This does not mean I am preaching high friction onboarding processes, right? Because sometimes there are some products or some industries where minimal friction is the best. If Uber asked me where I lived before I booked an app, I would definitely not use Uber. Right? If Zomato asked me what kind of spice levels or what kind of cuisines I like before I ordered food, would not be using it. Although Cult asks you what your goals are, they ask you what your diet looks like, that feels like ownership. So not preaching either way, but I want you to start thinking about these terms. Right? As engineers, start thinking about engineered friction, start thinking about what makes users buy in. And you might arrive at a solution that's one of these two or even a third thing entirely, but it's important to start thinking about it. Which brings me to my second conclusion of don't just catch bugs as engineers, catch behaviors. Okay. How many people know what kintsugi is? Nobody. Okay. You might have seen it, but you might not know the name for it. Yes? Okay. It's called kintsugi, by the way. When something breaks, for those of you who aren't familiar, when something breaks in most of the world, we tend to throw it away. We completely discard it. Why? Because the newest, shiniest object is just better. In Japan, that same ceramic bowl or vase or whatever, in glass sometimes, is repaired with gold lacquer. It's a house that do it with gold, sometimes it's gold lacquer, does not matter. The point is those cracks and that breakage becomes part of their object's history. That same broken object, once repaired, is now telling a richer and fuller story than just a fancy new one, right? And some of you might relate to this, but once you have a phone that's like 2 or 3 years old, and it gets those first couple of cracks or dents on the, it feels like yours. That exact same phone, if you give it a new one, you won't like it as much. It's purely psychological, because there is a history to it, there is a story to it that is yours. And those principles can translate to UI design as well. You don't hide those jagged edges, right? Sometimes it's important to just convey them upfront, but in a way that is pleasing to the eye. I have seen a lot of mobile developers be guilty of this on the left. The moment a backend throws some error, you do toast or whatever iOS equivalent is, and you show that same error to the user. You are not concerned with, when I say you, I mean all of us, we are not concerned with what that error is, whether the user will understand it or not. We just push it onto a backend engineer to write the correct error message and display it to the user in a red box that assumes that they will understand what that is. This is terrible error handling. You know how most people do it instead? You hide the error and you show a loading state in the background, you do silent refreshes, praying and hoping it will work. That's the Western approach, or even the Indian approach now. The Japanese approach would be to take that same error message, keep trying in the background, but put the user first. Take that same error message and try to push them in another direction. Don't paint over the crack. Say yes, it failed, right? But you can try other login options as well in the case of this screen. You're still trying in the background, you're still doing the engineering heavy lifting. That might succeed, but you can't pause the user UI until that's done. That's just terrible UX. Which brings me to the third lesson. The API is a suggestion. Do not treat it as gold. Your UX is the contract that you're agreeing with the user, right? Again, seems like a very design principle. This is what you have to level up with. You have to think user first. Put that user behavior right at the forefront of everything that you do, and let all of the backend stuff come in, and you decide what to do with it. Now, I'm aware, I promised you a framework, and I'm aware most of your delivery pipelines look something like this. You have a ton of features, you have PMs adding, you wake up one morning and the PMs added like 100 things to the backlog. Something as simple as a color change, something as complex as adding new auths. We all work in aggressive, fast-moving tech cultures. Unfortunately, that's the new reality of most companies these days, because competition has become cutthroat. Funding has become more vertical than horizontal. The differentiator in most companies is, unfortunately, how fast you can ship. That's not the answer always, but it's how a lot of founders are coded to think. Going back to what I said, right? When a founder or a PM pushes back saying, we have all this in our backlog, and we need to roll out by Friday or tomorrow if you're unlucky, don't push back on that data, and here's framework that you need to use. First, evaluate what the request is. Right? Sometimes what is said is very different from what the PM or founder intends. It might say color change, but start by diving deeper. Why is the color being changed? If it's something larger like aligning with a brand identity, that's fine. You can't push back on the brand identity is bad. With something like higher contrast, right? Or users aren't clicking on it. Dive into that. Dive into why a certain thing is being requested. Then estimate the cost and not the monetary cost. Like I talked about the lifecycle agreement cost, right? Is this going to increase complexity? Is it going to increase start time? Is it going to bloat up the app size? Is it going to make users' journeys harder? Evaluate that cost. And then when you push back, this is the point. I've seen still people do the first one and second one. When you push back is where I've seen most people fail. Don't push back by saying we shouldn't do this. Push back by what is called the yes and framework. Say yes, if we do this, load times are going to go up by 10%. Instead, we can pivot or do halfway, where load times only go up by an acceptable 2 or 3%. Right? So Don't push back just by saying nahi chalega or too much code or all of that. With this framework, it will help you have rational pushbacks that are actually understood and appreciated by most PMs you work with. And having been on both sides of that journey, I know that any engineer who starts thinking in these terms is worth their weight in gold. Summarizing, right? Enforce the, yes. Yes. So, okay, I'm going to try to rephrase this. Sometimes your product manager is going to put a feature on your backlog, which is probably thought through in much more depth than by your founder and your PM, but it doesn't look like that on the backlog. The example I gave, right? Maybe the backlog button says, so the backlog task on Jira says, change this button color to some random hex code, right? A classic engineer would pick up the hex code, copy it, put it in your variables file, paste it and say, ticket is done, right? But a color change is simple. What if it's something like moving a button or prefetching data, right? Those aren't as simple and you can't do it in a half a minute or something. For those, try to strip down and see why that thing is being requested. Sometimes if a PM tells you prefetch data, the problem they're trying to solve is probably address completion or form completion, right? So take the request, try to strip it down from and differentiate between what is being told and what the intent is. It may not come naturally to you because all of us have worked so hard being engineers for most of our lives. I would recommend, if you're serious about adopting this in the first 1 quarter, just try to strip down without actually pushing back. But every Jira ticket that comes your way, try to deep dive on why it's being changed rather than just doing the change. And then you can pivot into evaluating how much it costs and then requesting a pivot. So summarizing, 3 things to be a product engineer. I'm not going to leave you with a long checklist because there is a lot to do, but these 3 things will take you from 0 to 0.5, and then that 0.5 to 0.1 journey is much simpler. 1, enforce the lifecycle agreement between you and the PM or the founder. Hard code metrics like app start time, data fetch time, app experience, time spent on the app. Hard code all those metrics, good metrics that everyone in the organization should stick by. Then any feature requests, feature removals, any changes, use those metrics as your source of truth. Own the feedback loop, not just the features themselves. Try to figure out if something is happening, why it's happening, how do we measure whether it's successful or not, and what can we change in it. And last, calculate the cost of saying yes. Sometimes it may seem simple, sometimes it may seem more complex than it is. But the moment you start calculating that cost is when you're transitioning from engineer to product engineer. And like I said in the beginning, saying no and all is fine, right? But the true leverage is knowing when to keep your IDE completely closed. You could probably write the best code, right? Or nowadays your AI could write the best code. You could write the best prompts. But the true leverage is knowing when not even to get into the prompting stage. That's the difference between an engineer and a product engineer, right? Try to get more involved in the higher level discussions. Like I said in the beginning, just observe, then start pushing back. But this is sort of your gateway into making that transition. For everyone who still has a nugget of doubt thinking that engineering is going to be phased out, we are not anywhere near that category. All of us will become operators rather than executors. That's the only shift that's going to happen. If you've heard of some of the newer terms like loop engineering or harness engineering, look those up. Those are the directions that we're heading in, where we write the logic around the code and then the code writes itself. Right? Cool, thanks so much. I'm around for a bit if you have any questions on product design or engineering. Not so much on engineering. But yeah, thank you for listening. Yes.
How do we introduce or pivot the way that we are thinking at the organization level or at team level or cross-team level? Let's say if I implement this product mindset, I am doing it at my individual level, but I want my team also to include it and then cross-functionality so that everyone would benefit with it. So how do we take up to our manager or our line of business?
Okay, you guys could hear his question. How do you make product thinking happen at an organization level rather than the individual level? First, pray hard. Because change comes after awareness. Awareness has to be first, right? If people aren't aware that the engineering paradigm is shifting from just code to product and code, then change is never going to follow. Let's start by that awareness, whether it's talking about it in meetings or even sending articles on Slack. That's where awareness starts. Change is easier once that awareness is there. Typically should come from the top down. Should be product managers within the organization sort of spreading their product thinking across the org, and from the bottom up. You're seeing nowadays a lot of PMs are prototyping as well, right? They're writing MVPs or whatever. So have that mutual knowledge sharing where you're telling them how not to screw up an MVP. They're telling you how to measure acquisition and retention. So have that mutual knowledge sharing. Beyond that, if you're working in a larger company, it is going to be, unfortunately, it's going to be near impossible for one voice to be heard. It's going to have to be a gradual chain of thought that happens from you to your colleague to someone they're close to, and then so on. And I'm being realistic, I don't sell dreams, right? The only way it's going to happen at scale in a massive organization is someone talks to leadership, right? So, say today you meet someone like Vivek, right? Have someone like him come and talk to your founder. You're going to take him way more seriously than someone like you. So that's at scale. In smaller organizations where it's like a 30-40% team, these can sometimes happen from the bottom up, but it depends a lot on ego, unfortunately. People don't like being told they're wrong, especially in India. We think we're immune to mistakes. I would suggest just balancing your own security within the organization, within how much you care about the product. Push back until you see people not accepting your pushback. Beyond that, again, like I said, spray. Anyone else? Okay, thanks.